Okay. Did you want to say something first, Nadia, or I'll just kick it off?
You're more than welcome to jump in and kick it off.
All right, let's get going. Hi everybody, my name's David Gardiner. I'm a software developer based in Adelaide, South Australia, and it's great to be joining you this evening or this morning or whatever time it is, wherever you are. This talk I'm going to give is really all about using Azure Repos, which is part of Azure DevOps, to improve quality and sort of enhance what comes in the box by sort of integrating with other third-party systems that you might have. Okay, so let's dive in. So first of all, a quick background on Azure Repos and Azure DevOps. What are they? Well, it's a product from Microsoft. We'll just switch over to my browser, which is that screen there. And here's Azure DevOps. I've got a project set up here, and it includes features like dashboards and a wiki. We can do work item tracking. We've got our repos, which is what we're going to be focusing on today, as well as build pipelines, test plans, and Azure Artifacts, which is about managing packages as well. So there's a whole lot of stuff that comes in the box, but it might be that we've got some other systems we want to integrate into our workflow when we're using Azure Repos. So the systems that we're going to have a look at today to get them to work nicely with Azure Repos, one of them is JetBrains TeamCity. So this is a build server produced by JetBrains. So it could be that you're already using TeamCity in your organization and you don't want to just throw that away, but you want to make use of that with Azure Repos. And another product called JetBrains Upsource. So there is a code review feature built into Azure DevOps, but maybe there's some particular features of UpSource, which is also a code review product that you want to make use of to do some more advanced workflows around your code reviews. So again, these are two examples, but it could be some other system you've got that you want to integrate into Azure Repos, and we'll demonstrate tonight how we can go about doing that. So our plan is we're going to make use of branch policies in Azure Repos. So by default, we've got our Git repository, we've got a master branch, and we can just commit to that. But what we want to do is enforce a branch policy so that every change needs to go through a pull request. And for each pull request, we want to make sure that we've got a TeamCity build that is passed. So if you had unit tests that they'd all passed. We've also had a code review done in UpSource, and so someone has reviewed the changes in the pull request and has approved that. And we're also going to optimize our build pipeline and optimize the way we work with these other systems by using some Git hooks to notify these systems when code is changing in Azure Repos. So before we go too far, let's have a look at the finished product. So we'll jump back to our browser. And so here we've got Azure Repos. I'll show you, we've got two repositories here in this project, and I'll jump over to my demo project. This is the one that I prepared earlier. And we've had a look at our branches, and we'll see we've got this little icon here just indicating we've got some branch policies set up. And I can click on that. And we'll see that our current policies include that we want to make sure that we're linking a work item to each pull request that's required. And if we scroll down the screen, we'll also see that we're requiring our TeamCity and our UpSource code review. So they're the three prerequisites for a pull request to complete. So if I jump back to my pull requests, and we haven't got any active at the moment, if we find one's been completed, we'll just open that up and have a look. So here's a pull request that was completed a few days ago. We can see it's actually been completed, and we can see there's the checks. And indeed, there was a successful code review, there was a successful build, and we did link it to a work item. So all those three prerequisites were met. And so that pull request was able to be merged back into master. And so if we have a look over at TeamCity, we've got a TeamCity project set up for that repository already. And if we have a look in our build history there, we'll see that there was some builds that ran on our pull request branch. And once they were successful, then that code was merged back into master, and then we did another build here. Likewise in DevOps, we've got a project set up there, sorry, in UpSource. And so here was our branch and merge back to master. We did a code review, and we can see that that code review was approved. So we're now going to step through how do we set that all up? How do we integrate Azure Repos with these other systems and set up that kind of workflow? Okay, so sorry, back to the slide. So first off, the easiest thing we can do, it's nice to start with an easy thing first, just to get some runs on the board, is the notification. So we can notify UpSource about changes in the Git repository that's being stored in Azure Repos. So there's a link here to the UpSource documentation on how that can work. And essentially we've got a URL of our UpSource server, and we're using this notation, and we just need to pass in the project ID to notify UpSource that it should go and check if there's any new commits to Git. So by default, if we don't do this, then UpSource and TeamCity will just poll the Git repository at a regular interval, which is okay, but it means that there can be a delay while you wait for it to notice if there's a change. So what we can do here is we can use Azure Repos to notify these other systems that there are changes that they should get. So it could be much more responsive and more efficient too, because we're now not polling the system all the time, even when there's nothing to do. So that's for UpSource. The second thing we can do is notify TeamCity about Git changes as well. It's a little bit more complicated here because UpSource was happy just to take a post, HTTP post on an endpoint. TeamCity also wants a post, but it needs to be authenticated. And the URL notation is a little bit more complicated too. We're going to have to match part of the Git URL. And so then TeamCity can figure out, oh, this Git repository that I know about has changed, so I should go and reload those changes. So I'll show you how we've done that in the demo site, and then we'll have a look at how we can automate that with a script. There we go. So we've got some service hooks set up currently for our demo site. So I've jumped into the project settings and service hooks in the DevOps project, and we'll just have a look at one of those existing webhooks. So there's a number of different events that we can choose to hook into. The one that we're interested in is code pushed. We can then narrow down what repository we want to look at for this event to trigger. So we've said in this case my demo app repository, Git repository, and then on the next screen we need to put in the URL. And so this one I've clicked here is for TeamCity. And so there's a couple of things to note here. I've got my authentication, I've got my username and my password there set up. When you use authentication, basic authentication, you do need to make sure that you're using an encrypted connection, so HTTPS. So I've actually wired up a DNS entry and set it up so that I can use HTTPS to talk to TeamCity. We'll have a look, if we have a look at the UpSource one, we'll see that one doesn't need to be encrypted. Down further, we can control what extra information we send when that notification is posted. In this case, we don't need to send any other data, but you might have a system where you want to know more information about what code is being pushed, e.g. what the commit was and other details, who pushed it, that kind of thing. We don't need that for here. You can test as well, so if that's all configured correctly, you can do a test and it'll just use some dummy data to test that out. So that's all okay. And this other one that's already been set up, it's a code pushed. And in this case, we're pushing to our UpSource application. So it's running on a different port. And we didn't need to pass in authentication for that one. So that's all. That was what we did for the demo one earlier. So how can we set it up for our live application? Well, if we jump over to, whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. There we go. VS Code, and I just got the wrong VS Code. Whoop. Actually, I'll just load that up to show you what that script looks like. Just grabbing a path from my clipboard here. Sorry, that's not what I wanted to do. I copied more than I needed to. There we go. Nope. Sorry, I should have had this ready to go. And let's get this source code up. All right, this is better. This is what I'm after. Okay, so first of all, we're going to create our service hooks. And so I've got a PowerShell script here to show how we can automate this, because it's all very well to go in and manually do that, just like I've shown through those steps earlier. But this is something we want to be able to roll out for a whole lot of projects in a repeatable way. So we can use PowerShell to do that. So I've got a script here. I've got some parameters, a few of which are to pass in some passwords and access tokens. And we're going to run this script, and then we'll step through and watch what it does. So I'm just going to hit F5. First thing I need to pass in is my access token. So I'm just going to copy that from off screen, because you don't need to know what that actually is, and paste that in there. I also need to pass in my TeamCity password. Again, I'm just going to copy that and paste that in. Okay, so we've now got all those parameters in, and we've got our URL that we can hit the API for Azure DevOps, and we're going to query the Git API, because the first thing we need to do is find out, whilst we know what the repository name is, we need to find the ID for that. So we're going to use the API to do that. So there's an invoke REST method, and now if I just hover over that, you'll see there's a GUID that comes up. So that's the actual ID for our live repository. And we just check that that worked, skip over that. And likewise, we need to do the same for our project. So we know the project name, but we need to get the ID, because that's what's actually used internally when we're setting up our service hook. That, and so now here's a data structure that's going to end up being turned into JSON, and then that's going to be posted back to Azure DevOps. So all of this structure is documented in the API documentation. The main thing here is we've got our URL that's pointing back to UpSource in this case, and we're passing in the UpSource project name there, you'll see. So step over that, converting it to JSON. There's the API we're calling now. It's under the subscriptions area, because we're creating a webhook subscription, and post that, and we'll see down in our output window down here, there's a bit of data that's appeared, which lets me know that that subscription has been created. And likewise, we're going to do the same for TeamCity. This time we're passing in our username and password as well, and hit OK, and we're done. So if I switch back to my browser and I refresh my screen here, what we should see, if everything worked properly, is 2 extra items, and there they are. So we've now got our live items there, and they've been added. You'll see there's no attempts, so they're brand new, but they're all set up. If we have a quick look at those, we'll see that they look quite similar to the ones we saw earlier. All looks good. We could even do a test if we wanted to. Let's give that a try. Yep, looks happy. Fantastic. Okay, so we've set up those, and all right, so we've set up our 2 Git hooks. So that should mean that just things work that little bit faster and a bit more responsive. And so there's a link to the documentation on the service hooks there. So there's other events we could hook into as well. So in this case, we're just interested in code pushes, but there's other things like when a pull request changes or is created, when a build in Azure Pipelines passes. We can hook into those events as well to integrate into other systems.
David, we've just had a question come in from Steve G, and he has asked, are the create service hooks and the create branch policies available to share, maybe on GitHub?
So the policies are just things that you configure in Azure DevOps. I guess the code that I've used, if that's what he's referring to as far as the PowerShell script, then we can, I think I've got some blog posts that reference that. So we can include some links to those for people. And yeah, feel free to reach out to me as well if you're interested in looking into using those. Hope that answers his question. Yeah, but yeah, so I'm happy to make them available as well on GitHub. Thank you, Steve. All right, pull requests. So we've set up our Git service hooks now, so we're notifying the other systems. Now we want to add those branch policies in place and leverage integrating into the pull request process. So first of all, we just need to do some configuration in TeamCity. So we'll jump over to TeamCity and we'll do that. Okay, so I'm going to jump back over to my live project here. So there's a couple of steps we need to do, and we'll repeat this just so that you don't miss a step. The first thing we need to do is we need to go into our VCS root, which is how TeamCity refers to version control, for example, for Git. We're going to edit that. And we need to update our branch specification. So currently it's just monitoring the master branch. We need to tell it to monitor and look for pull request branches as well. So I'm just going to copy and paste these two lines in here. The significant line is this one, and that's telling it to look for merge branches. This line here just means that the formatting for master builds looks a bit tidier. So I'll hit save on that. And then I'm going to go into that build. And I need to add what's called a build feature. And I'm going to add a new feature, and it's called a commit status publisher. And choose my Git repo root. And we've got Azure DevOps here. So TeamCity does know a little bit about Azure DevOps. And first of all, I need to post in a token. So I'll copy that off screen, paste it in. So this is the a personal access token that has been generated from within Azure DevOps. So it's allowing me to authenticate. I need to put in a server URL, which is just the first part off here, and I should be able to select that and paste it in. If you're familiar with Azure DevOps, you know that this is sort of the old naming style. They've switched the naming around for newer tenants. That's okay, you just follow the same pattern. We also tick this checkbox here, so publish pull request status. And so what this means is that every time TeamCity is doing a build, it's going to try and notify Azure DevOps through the API calls to let it know how the build status is going. I'll just hit test connection to make sure that that access token is good, and it is. I'll hit save. Okay. So we've configured TeamCity, and we'll just repeat that. So we configured the branch specification. This is the important bit here, to let TeamCity know about those merge branches and to look in that particular pattern. And again, we set up that commit status publisher. So there's the newer naming scheme there you'll see in this example. Okay, and next we've got UpSource. So again, we've got to do some configuration in UpSource so that it knows about pull requests. So let's jump back. So our browser will dive into UpSource and go to our live project. And we're just going to edit the project. And first of all, we're going to set up our webhook, and we're going to enable our webhook. We need to choose an event. So this is all about, for UpSource, there's events that it can hook into as far as, and this is what I'm interested in, whether a code review has been accepted or whether a concern has been raised. And we can then post a URL back there. Now I'll actually jump back to my slides at this point, and there's an interesting thing to note here, that when we're posting a pull request status, there's the documentation here, and I'll just bring that up in my browser. So here we've sort of dived into the API documentation for Azure DevOps. You'll see that here's the URL we need to hit, and here's all the data we need to pass in. Now the problem is that UpSource is not structuring its message in this format. So we have an issue there. What are we going to do? So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to create an application that's going to transform the message that comes from UpSource into something that Azure DevOps understands. So there's a few different ways we could do this. It could be an Azure function. We could create an Azure app service, or we could even host it on our own web server. Now, where you host it depends on where things are running. So Azure DevOps and Azure Repos are obviously running on the internet because they're a cloud hosted system. Your services, so TeamCity or UpSource, could be hosted and facing the internet and be visible by the internet. And if that's the case, then an Azure function or an Azure app service would be fine because they're running in the cloud and they'll be able to see other things on the internet. But if your systems are running internally on your intranet, then you're going to have to do a little bit more work. And this is possible. This is something I've done myself, so that this intermediate app, it will still need to be able to be visible from the internet so that DevOps can talk to it, but it might need to be running. So you might need to have a way to expose that by running it internally, but say having a reverse proxy so you can access it externally as well. If you don't want to run UpSource or TeamCity on the internet. So that's just something to be aware of. So I've set up a one running as an Azure app service, but Azure function would be just do the job as well. And what's it going to do? So there's a nice example in the documentation again for Azure DevOps, and it's actually written in Node. And so here's a really quick example of a Node web server, and it's based on that. We've just got using the Express module, and we're just listening on the sort of top level, and we're just returning a 200. Everything's okay. But we're actually going to hook into that. We're going to add some more code to listen to on a particular address, and then we're going to process that message that comes from UpSource and translate it into something that TeamCity Azure DevOps understands. I've got too many systems here. So step one, and we just started to do that. So we'll finish that in a second. We'll configure that to point to this address. And then what we need to do is call this API. And so create pull request status. And that takes the status, the repository ID, and the pull request ID. And again, these are things that UpSource doesn't know about. These are concepts that relate to Azure DevOps and Azure Repos. So the application that's going to be running in the middle needs to do a bit of work to figure out what the UpSource project is actually referring to, so that it can translate the data over to Azure DevOps. So the steps are really, we want to get all the revisions from a code review that's been approved or declined, figure out what the URL for the repository was that UpSource is talking about, then find the same matching repository for DevOps, and then figure out the pull request ID that matches those commits in that code review. So let's have a look at how we can do that. Okay, and here we are. So this is You'll see there's a bit of code down the bottom here that will look familiar on that first screen. This is the node application that we've got. We're passing in a few things like the URL of Azure DevOps project, the DevOps token, and also we need an UpSource token as well because we're querying both systems here. And so when we hit the UpSource endpoint, we get some data from UpSource. So UpSource has its own data structure that's passing in, and then we sort of decode those. We need to query, so the data that we get sent is a good start, but it's not everything we need. We need to find out the revision. So we've got some code that goes back and queries UpSource to find that out, and gets, as we outlined in those steps, we're then finding out with this code review, what repository does that relate to from the project that you're talking about. We then go over to Azure DevOps and to the Azure Repos, to the Git API here, and a little bit of hard coding there, but that's okay for a demo. We're then going and figuring out and trying to find the pull request that these commits relate to. So UpSource knows about branches, it knows about commits, but it doesn't know about pull requests. Pull requests are an Azure Repos concept. So once we find the pull request that we care about, we've got the ID for that pull request there by trying these different API calls. We can then set up the data structure, which is here. And this is going to be the pull request status that we send to Azure DevOps. And we're going to set the state as to whether it's succeeded or failed, or it's pending, as in it might have just been created, so we don't know yet if it's good or bad. And we're passing a description as well, just to let us know when this status was sent. And then we call the API, and this sends that data over to Azure Repos and updates the pull request status for this particular system. Okay, so that is running, and again, we're just sort of outlined that's the really important data structure there, and there's the API call. Okay, so we need to set that up, those branch policies as well. So I'll just finish doing the UpSource configuration, and then we'll jump over and have a look at the branch policies that we need to configure. So UpSource, we just need to put that URL in. So I'll just copy that over from here, paste that in, save changes. So that's all set up. Now, the other thing that it's probably worth mentioning, when I set up those Git hooks earlier, different systems may have a different polling interval. So now that we're actually telling UpSource when things are changing, we can go in here, we can actually bump this number up so we can make it 600. So I'll do that while I'm here. And you could do the same thing for TeamCity if you wanted to. TeamCity is a bit smarter. In this case, it will notice that it's being told about updates, and so it will automatically not poll as often, whereas UpSource, you just tell it, just don't check very often at all. You still want to have a check every now and again, just in case, but that's all good. So that should all be set up correctly. So we now need to set up our branch policy. So we saw earlier that we did that in our sort of demo project that had already been set up. And again, we want to do this in an automated way. So I'm going to jump over here to my VS Code. So that was our service hooks we created before. And I've also got my create branch policy script as well. So just scroll that over, that's better. So again, we've got some parameters that we're passing in, and then we're going to call into our Azure Repo APIs here. So let's run this script as well, and we'll step through it and see what it does. First of all, we need to pass a token in. So I'll copy that into my clipboard. And stepping through. So first of all, again, we just need to find out the ID of our repository. We've got that, and just as being cautious here, I'm making sure that I don't have these policies already configured. So I'm querying the current policies for the repository. And if I had any, then I'd list them here, but I don't. So I'll jump straight down. So that's something you can add to your script, just so you can make your scripts repeatable, so you can run them again and they don't cause problems. So they'll only set something if it doesn't exist already. So here's my first policy I'm creating, which is to require a linked work item. We're setting all that up, converting it to JSON. I just need to pass in the repository ID there, and then we're going to post that and create that first branch policy. And if it works, we should get some output down the bottom, which we do, which is good. The second policy is the TeamCity build status. And again, just mapping it back to this repository and stepping through there and posting that. And finally for UpSource, the same idea, we're just setting the repository ID and we're done. If we actually jump back to our browser and go to, I'll jump over here and go to my branches in my live project now, we'll confirm that we now have branch policies here, and indeed they're all configured as we would like to see. Okay, so there's no pull request in there at the moment. So I think we've got everything ready to go. So we might be ready to bring up my terminal window and this. Okay. And we're just going to make a change here. We're going to create a pull request. Before I do that, I'm just going to make sure that this is actually the interim app, also the translation application. I'll just make sure that's running as soon as it goes to sleep. Okay, so I'm going to create a new branch. And I'm going to make a change. So the change, I could make a dummy change. So I could just do an empty commit. But I do actually have a file here that I could add. So let's do that as well. So git add. We've got a solution file there. Add a nice comment. Okay, so now we're ready to create, to push our branch up. And so we'll git push our branch up to Azure Repos. And then we can create a pull request. Now I can either do that through the UI, which is how many people would do it, but I like the command line, and I've installed the Azure command line tools and set them up already. So Azure Repos, PR create, and I'll do -- open. And that will then open the pull request view in my web browser. So we'll kick that off. That'll take a second. And here's our pull request. So it's in our live repository. We've got our pull request. We've got some required checks failing at the moment. So let's just check what they are. So we're waiting for a few things, and we're actually missing our work item linked as well. So let's set that up. I don't know that's necessarily the right item, but that will do for our demo. And the other thing I'm hoping to see is my build kickoff and my code review. So we'll have a look at the code review first. So in live, here's the branch. So UpSource has already noticed these changes have come through on my branch, so I can create a code review for that. And I want to create a branch review in this case. And so we can see what files have changed, and I could review those. And that looks okay. Or maybe I've got a problem, so I might raise a concern about that. So yeah, I'm not too sure about this change here. If we jump back to a pull request, hopefully, if everything's working, we'll see that that gets flagged. Sometimes it takes a little while. Just make sure that's running. Okay, and let's have a look at our build in TeamCity and see what's happening there. Now I'm getting nervous. Have I missed a step? This is the challenge of live coding. Oh, there we go. I just needed to hit F5. So there we go. There's our code review has come back, and that's actually failing at the moment because I marked that as declined. So that's working. Let's just see what our TeamCity is doing over here. Do we have a build there? I might just, sometimes I just need to give it a little bit of a help along. Give that a second. I should be able to go in here and I can actually see on the version control, it'll tell me that the commit hook is active. Oh, something's running. I think it was waiting for me to stop looking. There we go, there's a build running. And there's our pull request running. I just needed a few seconds. So that's worked. So if we go back to a pull request, and there we go. I just saw it change just then. It was pretty quick. So our build has passed. That's good. So now the only thing that's holding this up is the code review. So if we go back to our code review, and so currently that's been raised a concern. But if I come back and I have another look at it, I go, yeah, actually, I'm going to accept this now. And I go back to a code review, and already it's been told about that change and everything's good. So we're now good to complete this. I can even view latest here. Complete this pull request, and I want to merge that back in. That's done. And if we jump back to TeamCity, what I expect to see is pretty soon we'll see a master build because that branch has now been merged back into master. Any second now. I think it's coming because we're just seeing the changes. Go there, here we go. And there's our master build and it's kicked off, and that'll just take a few seconds to run. Cool. Okay. So we've seen how we can enhance our Git pull requests, and we can use PowerShell and scripting to automate that as well if it's something we need to repeat a lot of times. So that to me starts to give me some ideas about, well, where could we take this? What else could we do? So you might want to enhance or change the process around when we're starting those builds in TeamCity. So at the moment, we're allowing TeamCity to just trigger those builds automatically, but you might want to be a little bit more deliberate about, actually, I only want to trigger a build when the pull request is created and maybe when it's been some other status change on that pull request. We also might want to be a bit smarter about, rather than just queuing new builds all the time, we might want to make sure that we cancel old builds when a new push is made to a pull request, because why do we bother letting an old build run when we've got a new one that we're waiting for? The old one's just taking up a build agent. You saw I had to create the code review in UpSource, so you might want to automate that by generating the code review automatically when a branch for a pull request comes through. There's things like running security scanners. So you might have a scanner that checks your source code or the binaries for viruses, or for accidentally including passwords or tokens in your code. So you might want to have those kind of things integrated into your pipeline and your pull requests. You might be really concerned about spelling, and you want to make sure all your commit messages have all the spelling mistakes fixed, or the grammar is correct. Or you might have a particular format of your commit messages, so you might want to reference some external system and include the ID of some external ticket in your commit message. So you could set up a process using the service hooks to notify you and do that checking and make sure that those things meet your requirements. So really the limit is your imagination and whatever systems you've got, how to integrate with those. So that sort of wraps up my talk of showing you how you can extend Azure Repos using the API with the service hooks to integrate with other systems as well to build a high quality pipeline that enhances the code that you're producing. So thanks everyone for joining me this evening or whatever time it is. And yeah, I guess just open the floor as well. If there's any other questions, feel free to post those to the Q&A. I'm happy to take those. And yeah, I'll try and make some of the code samples available as well on GitHub. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, David, and thank you for everyone attending. As David mentioned, if you do have any questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A. In the meantime, actually, I'll just take everyone through a couple of the upcoming events that are happening at the Reactor. So I'm just going to share my screen with everyone, and feel free to use this time to pop in any questions that you may have. There we go. Awesome. So if you want to find out some more information about the Microsoft Reactor or any of the events that we do have up and coming, feel free to join us on our meetup page at meetup.com/Microsoft Reactor Sydney. You can find out about our global events as well on our Twitter page, and most of our sessions are recorded and they are uploaded to our YouTube channel as well. The session will also be available within the next day or so, so you'll be able to access the recording. If you do have any questions about the Reactor or the session as well, you can email us at reactorsid@microsoft.com. So I thought I'd just quickly take you through a couple of sessions that we do have up and coming. So we are doing a session next week on build a quick and easy AI solutions using Power Platform in an hour. So in an hour, you'll go through some of the solutions and steps to implement AI solutions using Power Apps and Power Virtual Agents. So this is going to be a quite hands-on activity as well. So if you do want to follow along, there are a couple of prerequisites in the Meetup event page as well. And then we have another session, again around Power Platform, on Dynamics 365 Finance and Supply Chain Management Integration. So Microsoft Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations applications have been the backbone of all the financial data in any org, but how can you leverage this using Power Platform? So you'll be able to follow that along with a few live demos as well. And then last but not least, we have another Flow in an Hour session with Flow Ninja John Liu. So John Liu is one of our Microsoft MVPs, just like David here on the call. So this is going to be a 1 hour workshop to learn about Power Automate, which is previously Flow. You'll build, approve workflows, learn about controls and patterns, and debug and resolve errors. So that should be a really fun session as well. If you do have any feedback on tonight's session or any of the sessions that we present, feel free to leave it here at aka.ms/reactor/survey and use the event code 8050. I can also pop that in the Q&A chat for you as well. So again, we want to thank you all for joining. I haven't seen any new questions come through, David. So I think there was just that one today. And David as well also shared with me a docs link that would be a good follow-up from the session. So I'll also pop that in the Q&A chat for you as well. So yeah, I just want to thank you all for joining tonight, and thank you again, David, as well. It's been a great session. Some really great demos there as well. So yeah, everyone have a great night, and we will speak with you soon. Bye.
Bye.